Welcome to Adorama Avoice, a voice for creators. I'm your host, Daniel Norton. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of composition and exposure versus getting meaning from your shot. And we've got a couple of great calls from Steve and Nicky talking about last week's topic, being in the moment or capturing it. This week, I want to talk a little bit about what makes a piece of art, whether it be a photo, video, painting, whatever, important to us. And I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on photography, as always, but this should be fairly universal. And what I want to talk about, my note here says, memories and meaning versus composition and exposure. And what I mean there is we start to weigh these things against each other. And ideally, we're going to have all of those things be important. All those things are going to be the focus. But we tend, as creators, to go through a process, right? Based on many people I've talked to and my own personal experience. So let's kind of start at the beginning. When we are first deciding that we're going to take pictures, whether we think the first few times we do it, that it's something we're going to follow a lot, or it's something new to us, or we just have that impulse to do it, what we're doing is we want to kind of capture something. We have something inside of us that we want to say, maybe, if it's a more creative type endeavor versus, let's say, just documentation, or we want to capture something, right? We're having fun with our family or friends, and we want to remember that. So we use the camera or the video or whatever it might be as a means to capture that so we can remember it. That process is simple and easy to kind of understand, right? We want to capture something, and we do. Easy as that. We want to capture the memory. We want to share something. Now we discover that maybe people look at these things, or we look at them and we enjoy the process of doing it, and we want to be better at it. And here's where we need to be careful, right? Because we always want to be better at something, get better at it. So we start reading books or watching tutorial videos. We listen to podcasts, maybe, right? And what ends up happening is we learn the rules. And these rules tell us how we should be doing things, how objectively we can be better at the art form, whether it's to use certain kinds of paintbrushes for certain techniques, whether it's to use certain lenses as a photographer, or certain frame rates or codecs as a videographer, or certain words as a writer. And we learn these rules. And the rules are good because the rules are telling us what is more or less a universal language that we can use and to share so that people will understand it in the most effective and efficient way. That being said, sometimes when we focus too much on the exact way that it should be done by the rules, we lose the part of it that made it ours, the part of it that makes it our creation, the part of it that is our something inside us that we're putting into it. We can lose that. We can lose that in the mix, right? Instead of capturing that quick moment, we're now spending a few minutes setting it up. We're like, oh, you know what? Come over here and do this. Oh, could you do that again so I could catch it for the camera with a, better frame rate? Oh, let's do this. And what ends up happening is we start to become less organic and a little bit more contrived, right? We start producing things that we believe are the right thing to do based on the rules. And when you're learning the rules, doing these techniques is not a bad thing. It's kind of like, I've talked about this before on my YouTube channel, it's kind of like doing multiplication tables, right? You do them to kind of get the motion down, to get the memory of it, the muscle memory being your brain, or the artistic memory of, when I pick up my camera, nowadays I don't think, rule of thirds or any of these other things that people shove in your face when you're first learning, but it's in me because I did it a lot. And that's kind of where we want to be to a certain extent, because when we focus too much on the techniques and stuff, we can sometimes, again, create something that's more stale, and we lose that. Also, we can lose the moment. And like I talked about in the last podcast, we can also not enjoy it as much sometimes because we're not focused on it. We're not enjoying what's there. The difference between taking 20 minutes to set up a landscape photo, which you might really enjoy doing, and taking a snapshot to remember that you were there with your friends is a big difference. And what we want to strive for in most things is balance. So we want to look at this and say, okay, what is the net return of fun, or however you want to look at it, or memory, for me to take the extra time to do this thing, to get it exactly right versus just enjoying the moment and doing it now. And we calculate that out and do our however we want to do. And that's how we should approach things. This is true, of course, and we talked about last time about the whole living in the moment and everything, but also even when you are working, let's say as a portrait photographer, like I do, we are constantly striving to create great light. We are striving to create interesting image. We're striving to make the person feel comfortable, to get them to, settle in and quote, be themselves, right, in front of the camera with a lot of artificial things happening. And this sometimes, the process of trying to get people to do that, we can miss things that happen. One of the reasons why you'll often see me, if you're watching my videos, on a tripod is because I am the type of person that sometimes I will just grab a shot really quickly when I see something interacting with the person, because those are sometimes the best shots, right? I'm interacting, we're enjoying a moment together, and I capture it. Sometimes they might be slightly out of focus. Sometimes they might be slightly blurry. Maybe the composition is slightly off. Maybe the light's not exactly where it's supposed to be. But sometimes those images can be the best, the strongest, the ones that I come back to over and over again as a memory of that moment, of that shoot. The one that I really posed perfectly and the light's exactly where it wants to be, that might be great for a commercial client. But ultimately, the shots that are sometimes the better shots, the ones that create the emotion, the memories, the feeling that you're there with the person for those who are viewing it, are the ones that are a little bit imperfect. Now, is that to say that we should seek out and create imperfect shots? We've seen things like this, right? There's trends where people will throw a flash right on their camera to make it seem more amateur, right? We've seen things where people purposefully have oddball compositions and stuff to make it seem more, quote, amateur. And I think it's really interesting why people do that. It's like they're trying to fake it, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure it works sometimes, but because sometimes if you are creating a commercial type shot, it's hard to have that real connection. When you're starting, like when I was first starting as a fashion photographer, it was my life, right? I hung out with stylists, makeup artists, models. I hung out in the areas, we all kind of were coming up together. We were creating together. We would get together and do things. It was just part of our lifestyle. But as you start to become more and more established in the commercial world, that breaks away, right? It's not just a bunch of friends hanging out producing art for a magazine. It becomes a client and a commercial thing and art directors and everything else. So you can sometimes lose that kind of personal touch that you get when you're kind of starting. And what you're doing is you're kind of trying to recreate this by making the images less good, I guess, for lack of a better word, but making them imperfect, because sometimes when you're just out shooting with your friends, the images aren't imperfect. I often say, and this is the truth, that some of my favorite images that I use even to this day are not perfectly tack sharp. They're not the most perfectly exposed pictures. They're not the perfect composition, but there's something about them that just grabs the eye because they were something I did in the moment that was very real, very natural. And I think that's what we want to strive for as photographers, as artists, whether we're capturing our lives as we're kind of just going around and enjoying life and capturing it as a document, or whether we're covering a party or an event as like a wedding or an event photographer, whether we're doing an editorial for a fashion magazine. Now, sure, there's times where if you're shooting a very fixed advertising project, you're going to shoot the image that they want, but still those in-between frames can be really powerful and something that you can use possibly in an editorial context, or the client might use them as an insert, or you might just use them, or, the person that you're the subject, the model, the actor, whoever you have in front of your lens might want those images for themselves. So what does it mean to capture the moment? If you look at street photography, for example, you look at people like Bresson with the decisive moment, they're talking about either one of two things, kind of walking around, being very hyper aware of what's going on around you, looking for interactions, looking for this moment that really tells the story, right? The single frame that tells the story. If you have a 5-minute movie, you can tell a whole lot. If you have one single frame, how do you do that? And this is basically what we're looking at. You could set yourself up somewhere. If it's a rainy day, you could set yourself up where there's a big puddle. People are going to leap over it, right? So you can get those shots. You can even get the reflection of people leaping over it. You could have cars splashing through the puddle. You could have somebody running across the street with a newspaper over their head as there's a downpour, right? We can understand, by understanding human nature and how the world is and being hyper aware, we can wait for these moments. We can wait for them, and then we can capture them. And we can do it in maybe a more controlled way because we're Obviously, we're not controlling the person jumping, but we know they're going to. I mean, I guess you could fake it, right? But assuming that you're going for trying to actually capture the moment. Now, I guess I'll sidetrack for a second here and say, if you are somebody that wants to just create images like that, it's good to go out and watch and learn and see what people do so that you can then take your model or actor or friend or whatever and have them do it, right? There's nothing wrong with recreating it. Once we understand kind of human nature and we're watching people and we're understanding, we can start to be ready for when things happen. So we're hyper aware, right? We're not worrying overly about perfect composition necessarily. What we're worrying about is, or thinking about is, what do people do? What do I think is going to happen here? And if you're somebody who covers events, if you're covering like an award show or let's say a wedding, you know certain things are going to happen, right? You know that if they throw a bouquet of flowers, people are going to try to catch it. If they would cut the cake, right, there's going to be fun with the cutting and all this other stuff, walking down the aisle, all the things that happen in this kind of ceremonial situations, which a wedding would be. The more you do them, the more you start to learn, okay, these things generally happen and I can be ready for it. I can prepare myself to be ready for these things by studying people and by studying what's going on. So just the act of kind of going out and watching and, shooting, if you enjoy street photography, activity and seeing what's going on will just help you become more kind of used to, you get the muscle memory, the brain memory of like what you want to capture, which will then allow you to not have to be taking 100 pictures and slowing people down when you're just trying to enjoy, what's going on in the moment, right? The other thing I want to touch on here is kind of the value of an image. So we talked about this in the very first episode where I talked about why is photography important, and then we had a little chat about the value of images. And there's two things that an image is valuable for, right? In some ways, one is valuable to the people that are involved in it, that are working on the image, that are in the image. If I make a photo of my friend, that's valuable to us for a reason of a memory of us doing the thing we're doing, and I made a photo of that friend. It's valuable to me, so I can remember that friend in that moment. It's valuable to them, so they can remember the moment together. Is that valuable to just generic public? That's another thing. Perhaps it's something that's truly documenting something that's going on, and we might not know the value when we're making it, right? It could be that in the background, there is an ice cream parlor that eventually gets torn down 10 years later, and then 30 years after that, people are remembering it and they're doing a historical thing, and now that picture is relevant because here are people standing in front of this ice cream parlor when it was busy and active and the place was different. Or it might be valuable to people in a more of a commercial sense, right? It could be used as a stock photography type shot. An image could be useful, and again, in like a fashion context, or as a portrait context, as a LinkedIn profile, or maybe they're an author and it's a photo of them for their book. These things have other values there too. And when you start to talk about the value of an image as a more commercial product, then again, we have to start drifting back into the idea of the rules, right? Generally speaking, if we're going to use an image for something more commercial, we want to be, as I say, lowest common denominator. We want to use the things that generally most people think make an image good. We want to make sure the exposure is neutral. We want to make sure that this subject matter is, if it's a commercial image, generally they're going to be a positive in some way, smiling or something. We want to make sure that the composition is one that draws the person in. If it's going to be used for more of a commercial purpose, we want to make sure we have space with this writing and that draws the viewer into that area. So these are things that make it valuable in that sense. Sometimes an image can be valuable both ways, right? You might be out just shooting pictures of your friends and you might create something that's very good for a commercial use, and that usually comes from the idea of you do a lot of commercial work, you just get used to it, which we talked about before. But is having the perfect composition and exposure essential to make the image valuable to you and your friends or your family, as you are just using them as a document of what happened and that you want to use to pass on to people or to share with people that weren't there or to remember yourselves? I would say not so much. I think that if you can get an image that conveys the moment, but the composition is not perfect. If you can get an image that conveys the moment, but the exposure is not perfect. If you can get an image that conveys what it really felt like to be there, but you're not using all these rules, that image can still be very, very valuable to those who took part in the moment. Now, this also comes down to the idea of when you go on a trip or you go and you photograph something, Even if you're making a portrait session, let's say you get a new model or a new actor and you go out and you shoot for the day. One technique that I'll often do is not evaluate or choose the images immediately. And one of the reasons for that is sometimes it can go the other way. You might think that an image has intrinsic like commercial or value or generic value that the public might like because you really love it. But you might really love it because of the emotions connected to it because you were involved in it. That is to say, if you go out and shoot a bunch of pictures of your friends at the beach and you guys had an amazing time, you're probably going to look at this picture and be like, that's awesome, that's great. But they might not actually be, commercially, we'll say. And when I say commercially, I mean like that if you put it on Instagram or any social media, it would be something that people would appreciate. And I'm just using the word commercial, meaning you're putting it out to the public. It might not actually fall into that category. You might be connected to it. Also, if you had an amazing session with a portrait and they were telling you a great story or you guys connected on something and you took some images during that period, you might actually find more value in those images than somebody who wasn't there, right? They weren't there, so they don't understand why the person's making that funny face and they don't know that person and that person's not known for making those funny faces. So it might be like, well, this is weird, I don't understand it. But you really have to look at them from an objective point of view. I had, if I can remember the name, I'll insert it in the show notes, but I probably won't because somebody had told me a story, this is years ago now, about a street photographer who would shoot a roll of film every single day. So this is pre-digital. And they would put it in an envelope and they would wait 1 full year to process the film. And then they would look at it. That way, so every day they were getting a new roll processed from the year before, I guess after the first year. But that way they didn't even remember taking those images a lot of times. They lost their personal connection to them, and they were just looking at them objectively from the point of view of a photographer or as photography as art. And I think that can be really useful if that's what you're doing. But if you go on vacation, you have a great time, and then you go back and you look at your images only from that perspective, you might actually not feel like they're as valuable, to the group as they really are because the people that were there see it differently. So your audience is really key here. There's always going to be outliers. Like I said, there's pictures that I've taken that people really like and that I've used in my portfolio many times that definitely break a lot of rules and nobody was there but me and the subject, so it wasn't like they're connected for that reason. Sometimes an odd image, odd meaning different than the norm, is the one that sticks out. So there is no perfect rule or perfect setup where you can just know that this image is going to be one that's going to connect with a general audience. But the more we do, the more we create, the more people do react to our images, the more we get a feel for what might. Again, I can't remember the photographer that said it. If somebody knows, call in or send me a message. They said, if I knew how to make a perfect photo, I would do it every time. Because the reality is that if you make a photo and you follow all the rules, so that's a quote perfect photo, it won't be, right? It'll be stale and boring. If you break just enough rules to entice and to bring emotion to it, that will be the perfect photo. How much to break, how much to use in each situation is different. It changes. It really is up to that photographer in that moment to decide what's important here. Is the memory, is the motivation, is the beauty more important than your perfect composition or your perfect exposure? Or are those things more important to make the images carry through and have more of a universal appeal? Because ultimately, I think that's what we want. Even if we're out shooting images for ourselves, if we intend to show them, then we want people to enjoy them, right? We wouldn't be making images if we didn't want people to look at them, to enjoy them. So if you are, in fact, creating photos and you do plan on showing them to people besides those who are in them or in the moment, you are looking for that kind of universal goodness, for lack of a better word, right? Universal connection. And that is something that you will develop a skill at noticing over time. So what is the perfect shot? We may never really know what is the perfect shot. I think a lot of us have different opinions of what is great or what isn't. But I think if you can make an image, whether it be video, whether it be a painting, whether it be a photo that appeals to more than just those who took part in it and bring some emotion to them through the viewing of this image, I think you're about as close to perfect as you can get. I want to thank Adorama for supporting this podcast every week. And you guys can support them by going to adorama.com and checking out all the great gear, photo, video, audio, whatever you're looking for. But in addition to that, Adorama has a series of contests called Create No Matter What. So if you go to adorama.com/create no matter what, you'll see there's currently a video challenge up right now, editing and storytelling. It's up until the 30th of April, and you can win some great prizes. And these are constant. So if you're constantly checking out adorama.com/create no matter what, you can see whatever type of contest you might want to enter. It gets the kind of creative juices flowing, gets you to try something different. There's even one a few months ago that I did during the holidays, so you should check all those out. As I've said before, reviews and ratings are super important for a small podcast like this one, and every week I'm going to read a review. If you guys have not reviewed the podcast yet or rated it, please do so, but this one is from Paramedic BK via Apple Podcasts. Fantastic content from a great creator. I have been a fan of Daniel's photography and YouTube videos for a long time, and I'm excited about the direction he is taking with his podcast. Great guy and great information. Thanks, Daniel. Well, thank you. I know that podcasts and videos about all the latest, greatest product are generally going to grow much quicker, but I feel like this podcast is something a little unique. And if you guys have not shared it with your other photography friends or just creators in general, that would be great. And as I said, if you could send a review or a rating, even better. So we've got a couple of calls this week. The first one is from Steve. If you guys are not aware, you can send a message to the show using the Anchor app. The link is in the description below. And there's lots of other ways you can reach out to me. I will talk about that at the end, but let's hear what Steve has to say.
Hey, Daniel. Very interesting topic. I just thought I'd share with you a little thing that I did with my photography club. We had a kind of a 7-day challenge where we were to go out and take photos using just one lens. So no matter what you were doing, you just brought one lens. So one day for me, it was my 85 millimeter. The next day, it was my 70-300. The next day, 24-70, and so on. And also, we brought our phones out. I did a day with my phone. I did a day with a DJI Pocket 2, just to see what it was like. And I know exactly what you mean about, going to parties and stuff like that. Sometimes it's you feel kind of obligated to bring your camera. I normally do. And as far as the whole creative thing, if I go to...
Oh, looks like we got cut off there. If you are calling in using the Anchor app, be wary, guys, that you can only leave 1-minute messages. If you want to leave a longer message, just send more than one, and I will play them in order. Or you can send me a message by recording something on your phone and then just emailing it to me at avoice@gmail.com. But let's talk a little bit about this. Yeah, I think restricting yourself is actually a really great way to open up your creativity. The idea of using a single lens is great, and it's kind of a common, or it used to be, back when I went to school, thing for you to do in photo school. It's like, okay, well, pick a lens and work with it for a week or whatever. It's a good way to kind of open up your eyes to the fact that you can do a lot with a lens. And also, one of the big misconceptions that people have, which is that the lens has a lot of effect on distortion and stuff, which it does on some level, I know, but a lot of what we think of as distortion and compression and things like that actually comes from where you're standing. I think it was Ansel Adams that said the most important thing about a photograph is where you choose to stand, something to that effect. And that's super important, right? If you have a 50 millimeter lens, you can get in close and do a tight portrait. You can go back and do a landscape. It will be different than if you use a 35 millimeter lens, mostly because of where you need to stand in order to make those same shots. So I think that's super interesting. Unfortunately, Steve got cut off, so I didn't catch that last part. But insofar as using different gear, yeah, I think it really does change the way you shoot. And and I didn't want to make it seem like if you enjoy taking your camera to parties and being the photographer of the group, it's a bad thing. I just think that sometimes we don't always necessarily focus on the thing that we're there to enjoy if we are then also saddled up with the task of being the photographer. So talking a little bit more about that is actually Nicky. So let's see what she has to say.
Hi, Daniel. This is Nicky, and I'm calling about your most recent podcast about living in the moment versus capturing the moment. And I think it's a really great, fascinating topic with pros and cons for both sides. And there's been some studies done that constantly taking pictures, constantly trying to document every single moment of an event or a vacation or something like that can actually have adverse effects on our memory. It can cause us to not remember that event quite as well as we should have. And as you said during that Weird Al concert, you couldn't remember some of the songs you heard because you were busy taking pictures, which is a shame, actually, since Weird Al is great. I agree. But there have been some studies done about how photography and constant photography, the way it seems to happen in our modern age, always with our cell phones and things like that, it can have an effect on how we remember things. Part of it is because our photography tends to outsource our memories. It's the same reason why people tend not to remember information if they know they can just Google it. It's like our brains know we don't have to retain this because we can find somewhere else. So when we constantly taking pictures, our brain's like, okay, it's going to be stored somewhere else. So I don't have to remember. I don't have to remember because our brains essentially want to preserve resources. So they don't devote resources to things it doesn't feel like it has to. So we're kind of offloading the responsibility of remembering onto our phone or onto our camera, which is just one reason why it feels like when we take more pictures, we don't remember things as well. Also, there's something called attentional disengagement that can happen when we're distracted by the process of taking a photo. And of course, as a professional photographer yourself, you know how much goes into the process. I am not a professional photographer, but I know the work that goes into making a wonderful portrait. And it's a lot of work. And it's a pressure of capturing moments and concentrating on getting it right, which can cause your brain to not remember the actual moment when it comes down to it. You're so caught up in taking the perfect photo that you don't retain the perfect memory. And I don't mean you as in you personally, but just in general. So the good news, according to some of the research I read, was that when we do purposeful, intentional photos, they can act as really good memory cues for things that we might not otherwise remember. We have to focus on visual details. We have to focus on things when you're really trying to take an intentional photo, as you know, as I said. So taking those sorts of photos can be helpful to our memory, but snapping random photos trying to capture everything isn't always the best way. And I actually have had that personally in my life. My families wanted to record every moment, take every picture, when really, according to some of the research I've done, what you should do is take a few good pictures and put down your phone. You know, I got a really good picture of my niece opening her birthday presents or digging into her first birthday cake. Now I'm going to put the phone down and just enjoy my time with my niece. And I think that is really what we need to aim for if we want to have both good photos of family events and good memories. And intentional photos will go a long way towards helping with that. Anyway, just some information I thought I'd share. I got a lot of this information from an NPR article available on npr.org if anyone's interested. It's called To Remember the Moment, Try Taking Fewer Photos. And it references a 2013 study that has since been replicated both in 2017 and just more recently in 2021. So it's pretty good science for this topic. And I just think it's a great topic because I've had this argument with people. Take a picture of this, take a picture of that. And after a while, you don't remember why you're there or can't just sit there and absorb and soak in what's going on around you. So photography is important and photographers do important work, but sometimes, we need to know when to put the camera down. Anyway, I love the podcast. Keep up the great work. Bye.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. Lots of great points. I will put a link to that article in the show notes so everybody wants to read it. That way you don't have to Google it to find it. I'll put it there. I think that intentional is really the idea. And as you were talking, I was thinking to myself about like the idea of taking notes. Oftentimes they say, if you want to remember something, like you're in a lecture or whatever, you make your notes, you short notes or whatever as you're going. And then later, when you look back at your notes, you don't just read them. You actually then copy them again, really concentrating and thinking about what's going on. And this helps you remember things. And I think the same thing can be true of photos, where you're out enjoying something, you're interacting with the world, you're at the party, whatever. And you're going to think very specifically about when you want to take these photos and why they might be the key photos that will help you remember those things. And I wonder too, if I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, if cataloging them shortly after would help. Because I know that I have lots of photos on my phone that I look back at it and I'm like, I don't remember taking this photo. I wonder if actually offloading them, and maybe the photographers out there can let me know what you guys do. Do you import things into something like Lightroom or Capture One or whatever photo software you use, and then put some metadata on them or put some notes on them to let you know what they were, what they are? I wonder how helpful that would be to people. Because I know that for my professional work, I'm always cataloging. I name the file, specifically the date that they were taken, who's in them, things like that. But when I walk around with my phone and I'm just doing kind of casual photography, I don't do that. So I wonder if that's something that, which is completely off topic, it was just triggered by your message, is something that I might try to start doing for those reasons, right? So maybe I remember later, oh yeah, that's when I took that. Especially for things, especially like on my phone, if I'm just taking what I'll call a random photo, right? I just see something cool. Or I'm just, visiting somebody for the day and we take a picture. So I think that's kind of good. And actually, I wonder how helpful social media becomes then, right? Because if you post things and then tag people in them or tag what they were, that could also be helpful. So yeah, I think these things, maybe there's this moment where we're taking almost too many pictures, too many unintentional pictures or pictures without intention and true intention. And then but it comes back on itself and we're putting them on social media so that we do remember them. I mean, who knows, right? Every once in a while, Facebook will send me a memory and I'll be like, huh? But most of the time I do remember them. So there you go. But yeah, I think it's really a good topic. There's no right or wrong here, really. I think that there's whatever's right for each person. And if you are focusing too much, we'll say too much for you, meaning you're not remembering on creating instead of enjoying, then maybe you got to come back a little bit. If you are enjoying the moments, then wishing you had photos later, maybe then you want to take a few more photos. Find the balance that works for you, I think would be ideal. Thanks everyone for listening and getting this far. I want to thank Nicky and Steve for calling in. I would love to hear your voice on the show. You could follow the link in the description below to leave me a message using the Anchor app. Keep in mind, they're only 1 minute long. If you want to send a longer message, you could attach a voice file to an email and send it to adoremavoice@gmail.com. You could also just send a text file, type it out, and just say, hey, could you read this on the air? If there's anything you want me to talk about on the show, feel free to send me an email there. You can also reach out to me on the Adorama Discord server or on any social media. All those links will be in the description below. I'll talk to you soon.